So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another foray into the new patch, or at least the test build for the new patch, which is marching ever closer to us. Now, this map may be familiar to some of you because this is the capital of Harad, or at least the representation of it that was created by WK, dubbed FAEN'OBEL in the various campaigns that Third Age has gone through, including over in Divide and Conquer, and I believe in Vanilla as well. I don't actually know of too many of the Harad settlements in the lore, but here we are, the capital of Harad as it is, and WK, being a Harad aficionado as he is, has definitely put a lot of good effort into this. I particularly like the colour scheme of this map with all of the red banners everywhere. In particular, the central courtyard is quite striking, with the giant symbol of the Black Serpent in a mosaic form emblazoned on the ground there. But yeah, so this is going to be an interesting one. It's also a pretty well laid out fortress. It's good for attackers and defenders actually in terms of how you can approach it. There's some more open areas, but definitely also some good areas to try and hold the attackers at bay in chokes as well, and all of it bound up in a very neat style as well. So yeah, this is something that I'm actually recording probably fairly close to the time it will be released, because I do have a tendency to push out stuff from the new patch a little bit quicker than other battles for obvious reasons, because this is the sort of thing which people are perhaps a little bit more interested in as a result of the new patch being highly anticipated for quite a long time now, let's be honest. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. We'll go through the settlement in a little bit more detail when we're going through the defending armies, but for now, the attackers, starting off with the player from whom we are going to be viewing from the perspective of today, which is 2 times. He is going to be playing as the Kingdom of Gondor, which generally speaking haven't gone through a total overhaul perhaps, but they still have some notable differences from their variant in the previous version of the game, namely that their strongest, most dependable units have changed a little bit in terms of their focus, but the Gondor infantry is still very much the same sort of thing that they always were. Both levels of armour upgrade present here as well, so the full plate armour on display, and they're always going to be a fairly dependable but perhaps fairly unremarkable frontline combatant when it comes to this kind of unit, I suppose. Though with 2 levels of armour upgrade, it does bring them a little bit closer to the likes of, you know, Uruk-hai infantry and Serpent Guard perhaps, but armour of course is maybe a little bit more easily countered than stuff like melee defence and the like. But yes, several units of Gondor infantry. Just in behind we also have the spear variant once again with both levels of armour upgrade. They're a little bit better at keeping themselves alive in melee. Spears are a little bit more savvy defensively, and this is not something that will have changed over the course of the patches, because it's something that's latent to Medieval 2 itself. But they do have that spear malice to contend with as well, so they're not going to be quite as devastating in melee. Not that I would call the standard Gondor infantry devastating per se. Then we have a unit which has changed fairly significantly, and with it the Gondorians will have to adjust accordingly, because we have the Citadel Guard, which are now a combination of the unit that they always were, an upper tier unit of spears, but they now also have a javelin attack as well, which technically makes them better, obviously more well-rounded with that armour-piercing ranged attack, which they now have at their disposal. But it does make them a little bit more fiddly to use, perhaps, in the sense that you do need to position them just so in order to get the most out of these thrown javelins. Worth bearing that in mind if you do intend to use the Citadel Guard, but they should still be the same sort of unit that they always were in melee at the very least. So even if you fail to use the javelins completely, you're not losing anything, technically speaking. We also have the upgraded Axeman of Lasarnak over here, considering it's the Haradrim on the defence. I don't know how effective going in for armour piercing is necessarily going to be. I mean, they won't go to waste surely, because you know the base damage on heavy axemen is always going to be decent enough to the point where you're going to do damage to the thing you're fighting, but generally they're going to be better against factions which rely more heavily on their armour, which Harad don't really. They do have some mid tiers against which this unit will be effective, but I do like the Axemen of Lasarnak in terms of their style. One of my favourite looking Gondorian units actually, so there is that. We have the fully upgraded Veterans of Osgiliath, and by that I mean they have 3 levels of armour upgrade, so this is something which I don't know how widespread it's going to be. Gondor may very well be one of the only factions to have access to the ability to upgrade the armour 3 times, which of course you could always do in stuff like Medieval 2 campaign, but rarely have you been able to do that in Third Age, but now you will be able to, and obviously you can see that they gain the same sort of look anyway as something like the Wardens of the White Tower, so elite company indeed that they keep. And gold level armour upgrade means they are going to be a tour de force when it comes to skirmish fighting, so that's also something that's going to be worth looking out for as the battle goes along, but a little bit more difficult to maybe get involved in that kind of fight in this kind of situation, I suspect, but still an interesting thing to note. Another armour upgrade level. The Fountain Guard, which we didn't really get to see do what they usually do in the last battle, where Gondor was overwhelmed on the open field by their usual underlings in Dol Amroth, but Fountain Guard, a little bit more aggressive than they used to be. I think their phalanx has ultimately been taken away, but they do remain armour-piercing two-handed spears, so this means they can still be particularly dangerous against cavalry. They're much more of an aggressive unit as a result of this now, so maybe in some ways I suppose you would say they're actually less effective as a result of that, but they will do damage more quickly, and it will be less of a crutch for Gondor as well. It will force Gondorian compositions to be a little bit more adventurous with regards to what they do, and I think with the balance changes and such, that will be something people actually want to do as well. Gondor will be strong in other ways, but more of an aggressive unit and still very dangerous, obviously, against the Haradrim. Something which is going to be the same sort of unit that it always was, going to be the Nimlothian Honour Guard, the bodyguard tier heavy spear that Gondor have at their disposal. Armour piercing, very, very strong, obviously a new look to them as well. The shields look a little bit more in keeping with the rest of the Gondorian roster now, so I definitely approve of that. And you can see, I believe, they actually count as two-handers in melee as well, maybe? With regard, well, yeah, because this stance is something which only two-handers wield, so it could be that they're a two-hander with access to a big shield value, which is similar perhaps to some of the other heavy units of pikes we've seen in the game. And it gives them all of the same strengths as the regular Fountain Guard next to them, though they have that second hit point in the shields, making them a substantially tankier on an individual basis unit. We have the Pelargia Marines, still the same unit they always were. I think they also are one of the units whose look has not actually changed ever since Vanilla, but why would it need to? They're very much a sort of functional, lower end, technically speaking, Javelin unit, and that goes with the Javelin and Weapon unit that the Citadel Guard now are, so plenty of armour-piercing missiles there. These stakes are pointing the wrong way, but nonetheless we have some fully upgraded Gondor archers as well. I believe this is another example of gold level armour upgrades being employed, so you can see that they have the same look the marksmen of Caer Andros used to have with the black capes, so that's something else as well. So Gondor very capable of really laying the armour upgrades on thick, which will make them really effective in a skirmish fight, I think. You don't really want to be getting involved in a protracted fight like that against the Gondorians, I don't think, if they build for it anymore. Then we have Tundra's Fox, who's going to be playing as the Principality of Dol Amroth, marching in step this time with their Gondorian allies rather than against them in rebellion. Dol Amroth Halberdiers, we saw them very useful actually against the Gondorians last time around, though perhaps not so much against the Haradrim for the same reasons. Again, they're a little bit more of an armour-piercing focused unit, which Harad are a little bit more well prepared for dealing with, but again, we'll see. Harad have got some pole arms to counteract them in melee, but not necessarily the best. I would suggest that the throwing projectiles of Harad would be one of the main concerns for Dol Amroth here. We have the Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms. You can see little changes to the regular units of Dol Amroth. We already saw the Halberdiers and now the Men-at-Arms as well. A little bit more of a rugged Men-at-Arms look to them now, with more equipment on them perhaps, but good shield value, but very much the same sort of thing as the Gondor infantry, and they always will be. Like standard sword and shield line infantry units like this are always going to be relatively unremarkable mechanically. It's really just stylistically that we can talk about them. More Halberdiers in the midst of them. More Halberdiers over there as well, with some tactical geometry going on. Some completely unupgraded Dol Amroth archers, so more ranged pressure, but certainly not quite so sturdy as their Gondorian allies have decided to go with this time. We have some Dol Amroth spearmen, so no longer the Tarnostian spearmen, and they're much more similar now to the regular Dol Amroth units, being brought into a bit more uniformity, which is fine. I think this look suits them a little bit better than the old Tarnostian spearman look anyway. Interesting array of cavalry here. We have the Lance Knights in the middle, the Arathirim, a fantastic unit of course, aggressively, and then either side of them the new look Swan Knights, which I think are one of the best looking units Third Age has ever seen, to be fair. I really like this new look for them. The detail on them is fantastic, and single HP cavalry in this version of the game, I'm sure, will be far more effective than it used to be, so there is that to consider. But lots of money dumped into this cavalry here, so we'll see if it proves to be a good move or not. Now then, we have Cannon Fodder, who's playing as Numenor. I believe Numenor mechanically are going to be very similar, kind of like Rhovanion. There may be some minor changes, but because their roster is relatively small, I imagine we're not going to be seeing too much in the way of changes. We do see here the Haradrim Swordmasters, which have been given a little bit of an overhaul in terms of how they look, so little bit more of a black colour scheme going on to bring them again more into line with Numenor, as the rest of the faction is fantastic unit of heavy swordsmen, of course. In terms of exact stats, I won't go into them until the patch is actually out and we can start talking about them, but obviously going to still be one of the very finest units in class. We have some Naruna Aru Royal Guard, which have got some blue elements to them, but also have the burgundy, which perhaps foreshadows their eventual metamorphosis into Umbar. Really, really good skirmish archer this, they always were. Exactly the sort of thing which perhaps the fully upgraded veterans of Osgiliath will now be going toe-to-toe with in terms of how strong they are. We have the Royal Legion of Armenelos. This unit was already perfect as it was, really, in terms of how it looked, and here they are once again. Fantastic unit of sword and board bodyguard infantry. Numenor, a very quality-centric faction, of course. We have a trebuchet crew over here, which is manned by, as always, it is going to be the case in this version of the game now, a unique artillery crew. So we've got some heavy warhammer units here, so they're going to be more capable of defending themselves, certainly. Again, armour-piercing weaponry, so individually they may not be the most well suited to this kind of warfare. You can see here we have the Axe Guard of Armenelos, so a new unit for Numenor, which is going to be rarer perhaps than other factions may see, but it is nice to see that Numenor now do have access to an armour-piercing unit as well. As we've already said several times, it's not necessarily the best thing against Harad, but the high base damage will still allow them to crack through the defensive values on many of the defenders today. Just in behind them, Numenorian cohort remain largely unchanged. Again, upper end units of line infantry, much like the regular line infantry units. They're an unremarkable class of unit, and that is going to remain the case once again. There is a cavalry unit way off in the distance over here, and it is going to be a unit of Numenorian vanguard. And having a look at them, again, exactly what you would expect. This is the general's unit actually, so we'll see if they are a little bit more impressive these days. A couple of units of Numenorian shield guard, fantastic unit that they always were in the last patch. I'm sure that's still the same. Very quality-centric army, this, from cannon fodder. I don't know what the ammunition situation is going to be like on the steel bows, but I imagine they're going to be the same kind of unit, where the armour-piercing projectiles means they have a reduced ammunition pool. Maybe it'll be slightly increased. It's a change that I would personally make, not too much, just to balance it out, but they always seemed a little bit light on ammo in the last version of the game. And then the final attacking force that we'll be seeing on the field today is going to be the Rhovanion, one of the all-new kingdoms which we've seen a few times at this point. We've got some tribal levy skirmishers under the command of Froggy, so they do have access, easier access to entry-level units, which are perhaps more akin to some of the things that you would expect to see from Harad themselves. And javelin men here are going to be one of those things. We've got the Rhovanion nobles, a bodyguard tier unit of sword and board infantry, not too dissimilar perhaps to the Royal Legion of Armenelos, though a few men short in comparison. We've got some Rhovanion hoplons as well. The catapult crew is going to be an unlocalized placement text unit, interestingly enough. Looks like another tribal unit from here, in and amongst the heavy spears. So the Rhovanion units, the heavy, more defensive units, and then the tribal units more aggressive but far more fragile. Rhovanion hoplons once again. In terms of melee damage, the unit that they tend to rely on a little bit more so, Rhovanion, are the tribal berserkers with their two-handed falxes. A berserker class unit as they are, kind of similar to the Blackwolds in many ways, several units of them, only unlike Rhudaur, the tribal berserkers represent one of the only truly aggressive melee units that the Rhovanion have. Rhovanion phalanx, a shielded heavy pike unit, bit of a rarity in the game, though not completely anymore perhaps. Tribal levy spears, Rhovanion archers, tribal levy skirmishers and more spears as well, so the Rhovanion archers, plenty of heavy archers on the attack. So if it does get drawn out into a protracted skirmish, the attackers will fancy their chances there. But now the defenders. Tommy the Wise, one of the defenders, playing as one of the Haradrim armies. Entry-level Southrons. I believe they will have kept hold of their armour-piercing that sets them apart as an entry-level spear unit for the evil factions that has that armour-piercing, which will be very useful going the other way. We banged on and on about how the attacking armies, maybe the armour-piercing won't be quite so efficient, but it certainly will be from Harad outwards, and that is something that Harad certainly don't lack in melee or at range. More warband, we have more pikes for helping to plug up the gaps here as we head towards the docks with the black ships in port. Fully upgraded Serpent Guard as well. They're going to be able to go toe-to-toe with a fair number of the line infantry units on display for the attackers today, which will help the Haradrim cause, though stuff like the Trollmen here, I'm sure we will still see be the heart and soul of most Harad infantry efforts. just because of how truly devastating they can be with their attacking prowess. The Muhard Beast Hunters as well, so more throwing projectiles on display, and they're going to be very important for Harad as well. It's one area of genuine strength for the Haradrim. More armor-piercing projectiles, of course. Southron Archers up on the walls as well of the inner layer. Southron Archers, some Serpent Archers as well, so I believe they've kept hold of their poison projectiles. You know, morale of the human factions is not limitless. Numenor will take some doing to rout, but we'll see. Hashari. Assassin class units, I'm told, have been vastly improved in this version of the game, and this is the Hashari's chance to show it in a situation where the enemy have to walk into their welcoming arms. We'll see. Trollmen, we've got the Demons of the Desert, which specialty projectile units like this are always going to be a devastating thing, and Harad will maintain ownership of theirs. Southron Pikemen once again, Champions of Nathrat, still the scary unit in and amongst the Haradrim roster. Harad won't have changed too much, I don't believe. The cavalry overhaul may affect them quite a lot, and the Mumakil will be significantly more effective as well. So as a mounted faction, they may be more scary. But as an infantry faction, I imagine we're going to be seeing much the same sort of thing as we always did. Serpent Guard in and amongst things as a quality-centric unit, but for the rest of them, savagery and armour-piercing are the order of the day. Seraphim, another defending force. We've got plenty of Muhards. Haradrim Spearmen in there as well, so not completely foregoing numbers here, Harad, which I do think is wise. Southron Archers up on the walls. Serpent Guard, the dismounted Serpent Guard anyway, seem to represent the heart and soul of this defence so far. Haradrim Spearmen, of course, as well, the Trollmen is also. Muhard Berserkers once again, so more armour piercing, though of a lower tier variety. Beast Hunters, Serpent Guard, more Serpent Guard. Further over here we do have some cavalry. We have the Black Serpent Bodyguard, so again multiple HP Lancers, but they're going to have a difficult time sallying forth with the Numenorians and especially the Dol Amroth cavalry waiting for them. The Raider is here. Yeah, interesting name. Haradrim Spearmen, Dismounted Serpent Guard, Muhard Beast Hunters. We've got Serpent Archers once again. Plenty of lower end units, so going for numbers, which, like I said, not necessarily the worst thing. Several units of Serpent Guard, more Trollmen over here as well, waiting for the Gondorians, their worst nightmare, of course, and more Southron Archers as well. So, I don't think there's going to be need for too much of a cut here. I will make one, but it's probably going to be fairly swift as the enemy, or well, say enemy, defending archers start to rain down some projectiles from the walls. So I'll make a cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So it begins, and this is going to be a rather finely poised one, I think. As we've already mentioned, Harad going to be able to deploy quite a lot of their offensive capabilities against these kinds of factions, and the fact that they are on the defence and can use their fortifications to their advantage in terms of positioning means that their own shortcomings in terms of their defensive abilities are going to be a little bit more difficult for the attackers to exploit as all of the Trollmen start chanting. However, on the flip side of that, the defensive abilities of all the attacking forces will come in very handy as well. They will be able to withstand quite a beating at long range, and Harad, outside of their javelins, do not have the best ability to utilise more long-range projectiles like archers, and I mean, to be fair, Harad do have access to one of the few remaining body-piercing units in the game. They do have a mounted ranger after all. Some of the Gondorians falling on the approach to the walls. Don't know who's going to be first to make the first contact between the two factions. Of all the attacking forces, I do think Numenor represent the biggest threat to Harad. Their quality is going to be a real concern, and while the armour piercing will still be useful as the Haradrim come in here, so Seraphim trying to make good use of the Champions of Nathrat there, sending them outside the walls to go after the Dol Amroth Spearmen, which in all fairness an easy win there for the Champions of Nathrat, but with the Haradrim on station it has proven to be a little bit more costly than they would like. Not an ideal start for the defenders there, though that's a little bit gung-ho from Tundra's Fox. The Haradrim shaken as a result of all of these units that are nearby. I mean, trying to nibble at the heels of the Champions of Nathrat may prove to be a little bit of a mistake there, considering the Southron Pikes are in and amongst the shielded, dismounted Serpent Guard, as we've already mentioned, could very well prove to be an incredibly important unit here for Harad. If they're going to go on to win this, the dismounted Serpents need to be giving as good as they get in terms of facing off against the sword and board units from the attacking armies. Numenorian steel bows trying to loop some shots up onto the wall with some success. They are scoring some decent hits to the dismounted Serpent Guard. The armor-piercing projectile seems to have been improved a little bit visually as well, which is good to see. Secondary gate over here as well, a smaller gatehouse to be sure, as the Gondorians bide their time and wait. As soon as this gate is battered down, I'm sure that's when the siege towers will also be triggered, and the Gondorians will start trying to make their way through this area with a little bit more gusto, as the Rhovanion move forward as well. Really the one faction with an element of their army which is not heavily armoured. Those tribal units still there, very thick walls that have been completely cleaved through as Froggy's army prepares to start moving forward. But Dol Amroth, the ones here taking the initiative first and foremost, with Tundra's Fox moving forward with his Dol Amroth men-at-arms. A little bit surprised actually that they're already shaken, given the fact that the only unit they're facing off against on the walls here are Haradrim Spearmen. I'm sure that once the engagement settles down a little bit, the Dol Amroth infantry will start to get the upper hand in this particular fight. Will Harad send up any more reinforcements to help out? The Muhard Berserkers certainly will do that. And given the state of the morale here, maybe they'll rout. The armour piercing will certainly be good. There's also those Swan Knights waiting with some menace. The Arathirim ready to prevent any sort of sallying out from the Haradrim infantry once more, as the Muhard Berserkers start moving in with their bone clubs. Again, their own defensive abilities may very well stand them in pretty poor stead as the battle goes on. That may be an issue for Harad just generally. The staying power of many of their units is going to be called into question here, especially against some of the upper tier units that all of the attacking factions can bring. Certainly the more aggressive infantry though from Numenor. Move back over here. Gondor still not quite ready to start moving in just yet, as a unit of Muhard Berserkers ready to prevent that siege tower from doing what it will. But this little side passage going to be opened up for the Gondorians to start moving forward now. Still Harad wait, but yeah, the Rhovanion looking fairly menacing. Numenor and Dol Amroth effectively going to be moving down the same attacking lanes, whereas the Rhovanion and Gondor will have to be a little bit more self-sufficient by the looks of things. Numenorian steel bows still looping their shots. Still this unit of Dol Amroth men-at-arms the only unit of infantry in active, straight-up combat by the looks of things, but Dol Amroth ready to move forward again, maybe? Another unit of men-at-arms, though the dismounted Serpent Guard will prove to be a sterner initial test than the Haradrim Spearmen were. These are the units that are getting hit by the Numenorian steel bows, and the walls in this battle, or this map being what they are, maybe a little bit more open to attack from attacking archers outside of the walls. It's still not ideal. You're not going to be as efficient as maybe you would like, but it is still something that Harad will have to take into account. Southfront archers in a pretty good position here as well, able to get into a good place to start shooting the Numenorian steel bows, but you can see bit by bit the damage increases on these walls, but not actually going to be getting any kills on those Southfront archers. The only thing it will prevent actually is any Harad reinforcements from moving this way. So that's something, I suppose, better than nothing. The Gondorians now starting... Oof, that frame rate. The Gondorians now starting to make their move as well. Southfront pikemen backing up the initial Haradrim Spearmen. Once again, the lower end units of Harad won't be too thrilled with the task they've been given. Regular sword and shield units from the Western Kingdoms, ideal, really, for efficiently taking down lower end units like the Haradrim Spearmen, though Harad are at least trying to surround them with enough support to make them still useful, and this is some good timing here. But again, the Gondorians, not exactly great there. The Axemen of Lasana routing very quickly, taking a lot of damage very quickly as well, but the defenders here, ranks are very, very thick on these walls, so I don't know if the Gondorians are necessarily going to make any sort of progress. Gondor infantry are now trying to establish a sort of beachhead as well, but they will be outclassed in terms of melee stats by the Serpent Guard, and the armour piercing being added by the Berserkers is also going to worry the Gondorians, you would suggest. Some trollmen chanting in behind the walls there. Probably thrilled the battle is about to get underway properly for them. And the Gondor infantry as well over here. I mean, attacking on multiple fronts is key, even if you're not initially winning these fights. I do think it is the right thing for the Gondorians to do, especially seeing as this would appear to be an area of the battlefield where their attacks can bear more fruit. The fully upgraded Gondor archers trading back and forth with the Serpent's archers a little bit further into the settlement. Up on the walls, this unit of Muhard Berserkers doing its best once again, but the armour piercing is all well and good, but their own defensive abilities will be the thing called into question against soldiers that are far more well equipped than they. Also some Serpent archers in a pretty good position actually. They can start shooting in, and the poison projectiles, as we've already seen, morale looking a little bit ropey in places for the attackers, so some surgical use of those projectiles could be absolutely vital. Champions of Neferat once again getting clattered by the Haradrim, though a more difficult charge going through the gatehouse that was. Again, this unit of Dol Amroth spearmen, a little bit of an expeditionary force, and once again, only standard Haradrim spearmen around them, so individually speaking the Dol Amrothians are going to have the edge in melee terms, but there aren't really enough of them to sustain this for an extended period, you would suggest. Meanwhile, up on the walls, more Dol Amroth men-at-arms, though here it is a pretty stern test. Trollmen of Harad, though some of the Rhovanion units on the way across as well, and the Trollmen will certainly meet their match in terms of the tribal Berserkers, and a similar-ish units in terms of what they want out of life. Damage being traded back and forth, but how are the Rhovanion getting on? So they are starting to make their own inroads up onto the walls here as well. But this unit of tribal Berserkers, as we've already mentioned, really the only truly outstanding unit that the Rhovanion have when it comes to dealing damage in melee. They can certainly outlast Harad in terms of their defensive abilities, especially with their Rhovanion units, but these tribal Berserkers are an important aspect of their attack, and they're not going to be having a good time of it here, sandwiched as they are between the Hashari and another unit of the Serpent Guard. The Rhovakin Phalanx moving up onto the walls as well, a couple of units of them actually, so pikes on the walls can work as long as they get set. If their formation gets buckled, especially by something as dangerous as Trollmen, then the armour piercing is going to start cracking through the Rhovakin, and the Trollmen are on the way. See over here, the Rhovanion have established a pretty decent position within the walls though. Front lines are what they are, the Hoplons holding on with the support of those tribal javelins in behind them, so Harad forming up some front lines. The Southrons, especially the Southron pikemen, as the anchor will be very, very useful. One thing that the Hoplons will not be too pleased to see is another unit of Trollmen heading towards the front line. They'll be just fine at dealing with most Harad units, but the higher end Trollmen will be exactly the sort of thing you want to deal with these heavily armoured spearmen, tribal levy spears as well. The entry level unit for the Rhovanion. Shaken, not ideal for them. Muhard Beast Hunters in behind too. The javelin support, however, will be appreciated, I'm sure. Some tribal levy spears going up against Southron pikemen and warband, again being a bit overmatched here as only a single unit of what is effectively militia spears. Still the javelins doing their thing. A general has fallen. I don't know necessarily who that was. Feet, all we saw. Rhovakin nobles. I mean, the Rhovanion are the ones pushing in with some urgency here. Rhovakin Hoplons, once again the Muhard Berserkers, armour piercing useful, but there's some Berserkers too, so Froggy being very, very aggressive, which is good to see, but it's not all sunshine and rainbows for the attackers so far. Starting to see some Numenorians as well. The Axe Guard of Almenelos will add a little bit more bite, helping to deal with these dismounted Serpent Guard, but Dol Amroth struggling a little bit more so it's good to see that Numenor are now on the way forward, helping to pile the pressure on the defenders. Defeat seems certain for the Numenorian Shield Guard though. Once again, more Trollmen probably the cause of that. Beast Hunters, the fighting up on the walls, been costly for both sides. A fresh unit of Dol Amroth men-at-arms are arriving just in time too, because it was looking to be a narrow victory for Harad up here, but this will flick this back in favour of the defenders. More Dol Amroth men-at-arms doing their best, facing off against the dismounted Serpent Guard. Black Serpent Bodyguard are in there as well, which, again, if they can be used surgically by the defenders, could prove to be a very shrewd investment indeed. More of these Dol Amroth men-at-arms. It's only so long and so far this army can be spread out for the attackers, but generally speaking it is the defenders that blink first in this kind of engagement. Meanwhile, Harad have actually done a pretty damn good job here at stifling the Gondorians here on the left-hand side of the settlement. Only a few Gondor spearmen remain. Enough Haradrim still to hold on. There's the Pelagia Marines trying to throw the odd javelin in. There's poison projectiles still being launched. The Beast Hunters, though, certainly going after the right kinds of units, seeing the Fountain Guard definitely a real threat. Two aggressive units here with the Fountain Guard and the Axemen, but the Trollmen still, as they were in the last version of the game, the currently active one, very much proving to be a central facet of the Haradrim army. Though the Fountain Guard should give a better accounting of themselves than the units we've seen thus far. And another wave of Gondorians. I mean, this is the thing. How long can Harad keep this up for? They've done a pretty good job so far at limiting the territorial gains the attackers have made, but not sure. Nothing an Honour Guard up on the walls as well. Big unit to commit. A unit of Haradrim Spearmen is on the way, but the difference there. Militia Spears being committed by the defenders, a bodyguard unit being committed by the attackers. So that probably informs us on where this battle is going to be going in terms of the momentum shifts. Southron Arch is still there. I mean, not a huge amount left in reserve for Gondor, but they're furthest away from their allies' support, so they can't really afford to be too stingy with what they're doing. There's a few Dol Amroth units fairly close, but not close enough to the point where they can easily link up. They've got to go through Haradrim units to do that. More men-at-arms, so Harad's still fighting the good fight on several of the walls, but starting to see maybe a little bit more movement now. A unit of Dol Amroth men-at-arms have managed to take a section of wall, and they're now heading down onto the streets to face off against someone. Southron pikemen going to block their progress, but there are some archers from Dol Amroth that have taken up a good position, and they're going to be able to shoot through them, and Southron pikemen have got terrible defensive stats, so that's exactly the sort of thing that will result in a fairly swift victory for the attackers there. The Numenorians and the Dol Amrothians combining their qualities. Trollmen of Harad will struggle a little bit more now that they're having to go through an organised halberd phalanx, and also as much as they will still be good against stuff like the Numenorian cohort, the increasing quality in comparison to the other sword and board units that we've seen so far from the attackers is going to be something else which helps. The Trollmen, after all, don't have the best defensive stats, and extra damage from those swords will be very much appreciated, I'm sure. This new unit, I do like the look of this new unit actually. I've never been a huge fan of bilateral double-headed axes, but overall they also fill a niche in the Numenor army that was missing. Cavalry being used very aggressively is the sort of thing which can make a difference to morale. I don't know if that was the cause of those Haradrim spearmen routing, but numbers are important for the defenders here, and as soon as elements of the army start to run, especially seeing as they are spears at the end of the day, even militia spears can be useful at blunting knights when they're intent on being this aggressive. You can see here that the Muhar Beast Hunters have got a new secondary weapon as well, though. They're now spearmen in melee, which in this sort of situation will actually help their cause more than when they wielded small clubs, armour piercing though they may have been. All territory being claimed. Some Hashari are on the way from Tommy. We're going to see a throwing dagger. We no longer have the floating dancing swords of the Hashari. This class of unit, as I said, is touted to have been significantly improved in this version of the game. They were certainly very difficult to use for very limited payoff assassins in previous versions, but you can see there the throwing daggers seemingly doing a fairly hefty chunk of damage. Oh, the Rhovanion getting on. Managing to engage with some Southron archers, so that'll be a good win for them in melee. Harad's starting to do it well. We've got the Rhovanion phalanx over here, but surrounded as they are by champions of Nathrat and good quality Serpent Guard infantry as well. This is going to be the end of the pikes. I'm a little bit surprised Froggy committed both pikes to the wall, but I mean, at the very least they will hold out for a little bit longer. Catapult crew there. I have to say, it's not looking that good for the Rhovanion, as much as they initially made some pretty good territorial gains. Maybe they spread themselves too thin. Did notice after all that the Rhovanion were heading over to the main gates to give Numenor and Dol Amroth a bit of a hand, but that has maybe left them a little bit undermanned over here, because it looks like Harad have scored a bit of a victory in this section of the city. Numenorian vanguard making their way in now, however, through the hole that was made by the Rhovanion artillery. Phalanx, one of a few remaining Rhovanion units actually. Not a huge amount left to them. Some minor victories still being claimed, however. The Hashari slunk away at some point. Indeed they did, though the vanguard are after them. Are they going to be... given the zigzagging nature of the streets, I don't think they were able to get their lancers down there. So not the full amount of damage, but certainly the sort of thing that will give Harad some pause as we go past the Mumakil stables. We've got the Swan Knights moving in as well. I mean, this is a transitional phase. This is where the attackers generally are able to make some gains. Whatever Harad have left over here is going to have to fight and die to the bitter end. Serpent archers with a point-blank volley into the Nimrothian Honour Guard, but again, with how tough they are, that's not going to be too much of a concern. They can look after themselves in melee, the Serpent archers, but as we've already mentioned, you need something a little bit special to bring the Nimrothian Honour Guard down. Champions of Nathrat would be the one to do it if you wanted a 1v1. Serpent archers still doing their thing, so Gondor, despite the initial struggles over here, kind of the opposite fates have befallen Gondor and the Rhovanion here. Rhovanion made some initial promising gains but ran out of steam. Gondor looked initially like they were struggling a bit more, but however in the end the slightly more conservative approach does mean that they're going to have a little bit more to assist their allies with in terms of trying to take the centre of the settlement as the Southron archers continue to get run through by these spears. Mountain Guard victory seems certain. There's a few units still out there, like veterans and Gondor archers as well, so ranged units still available. As the mounted units from Dol Amroth really do like this new Swan Knight unit model. I think the barding on the horses is something that is in Divide and Conquer, though the actual unit model itself is something I've never seen before. Numenorian vanguard hovering around with malicious intent. Black Serpents are here. Once again, they may very well find, I mean, ultimately I think they were just trying to avoid getting involved in a cavalry fight like this. Generally speaking, Dol Amroth's cavalry is going to be better in a slugfest like this because of the better armour that they have. But they also, with the zigzaggy nature of the streets, it's going to be difficult to get up to speed for a charge. Black Serpents are maybe a little bit more manoeuvrable, a little bit faster, so they might be able to do it a little bit more easily than the heavier Dol Amroth and Numenor cavalry, but it's still a big ask. As the armies will reorganise themselves, Rhovanion archers here. This means that the defenders are going to start setting themselves out. So far the army's gathering on the Great Red Mosaic. As the gates close once more, though having a look at this, I'm not convinced they have a huge... I mean, Demons of the Desert are dangerous. They do have some trollmen remaining, but the density of trollmen and Champions of Nathrat we were seeing in the earlier stages of the fight would suggest that we're not going to be seeing as much quality from the defenders in the late game. They may need extra quality. Advantage attackers for the time being, you would suggest. Numenorian vanguard pursuing. Still some trollmen left. I don't know if they count as a Berserker class unit, actually. Maybe they do, because I honestly don't know if the Trollmen have locked morale, either in the older version of the game or this one. Though now that I think about it, very rarely have I seen them routing. Veterans of Osgiliath still. Harad not completely spent force here in the outer reaches of the battlefield just yet. The Serpent Archers still trying to get as many volleys of their poison-soaked arrows down range as they can. Those Nimlothians, though, doing the business. They're not going to be able to get out of here now, though. If they were intent on trying to save this unit of Serpent Archers, then the time to retreat them would have been far earlier than this. But it was always going to be difficult now that the cavalry has basically got free run of the streets on this layer of the settlement. Retreating units that far is always going to be quite hard. The black ships moored up in port, up the great river upon which this city is built. Have we here some of the Haradrim outside, Southron Warband spears, armour-piercing ones at that, not the sort of thing which Swan Knights ideally want to just be parking themselves in melee against, but also being a disruptive tool, disruptive element on the battlefield, is probably the best thing all of the attacking cavalry can be at this stage. Southron Warband thinking about pursuing them all the way, but deciding better of it in the end. Arrows downrange, Dol Amroth archers as well. And we actually did see taking up probably the best positions of all of the attacking archers so far, even though I think all of the other attacking factions today have got something better than the regular unupgraded Dol Amroth archers, but positioning a big deal as well. Still a few Harad units out here who are just being lined up and mercilessly shot. Point blank. Serpent Archers. Serpent Archers are generally better when the battle is joined and everything's underway, because that poison can be the extra little shove that morale can need. Although in this situation, I think with where Harad is concerned, it's also maybe a little bit risky, because friendly fire, of course, means that morale debuff is also going to be coming your way. Not ideal, that. Harad trying to whittle down the attackers as they move into position. That is going to be the story of the battle for the moment, I would suggest, given that it is a fairly long distance for all of the attacking armies to come, and they're going to have to stack up, and they're going to need to bring at least a ram so that they can get through the gatehouse. Any sort of artillery, maybe some siege towers as well, of which there are still a few in the distance that have not been used. Do we have... Yes, indeed, we do have a fight down near the docks. This unit of dismounted Serpent Guard also caught, another aspect of these transitional phases favouring the attackers, making sure that every possible unit that they can is dealt with before they can regroup and consolidate in the town centre. Not routing easily though. Numenorian steel bows in melee. The cavalry is going to be the main concern, of course. Some heavily depleted Citadel Guard chipping in, but they do rout now. Lasted a little bit longer in that fight than I was expecting. And look around, I think these are these Mumakil tusks that are being used in the construction of these domes, possibly. Would have thought that the Southrons would not wish to cut off Mumakil tusks if they utilise them in combat as they do. Rokin Hoplons moving forward with the ram. So as far as the last stand goes, it's quite a last stand location goes, it is quite open and quite big for the defenders to hold on to here. So it's not going to be the easiest task, although there are only 2 gates in. And if there are no abilities to knock holes in the wall, or the attackers simply don't want to go back and use siege towers, those 2 gates will be the only places they need to defend. Narrow chokes. Could that be the answer? Dol Amroth spearmen pretty far away from any of their support and close to the enemy forces on the other side of the gate, which is probably why they are wavering, even though they're just stood here not taking any damage. I do think the morale system in general has been tweaked for this new version of the game to be a little bit more of a factor in the battles and how you have to manage things. One way in which perhaps high quality defending armies can make up for the loss of what was their main crutch, which was the body piercing projectiles on rangers, which I think honestly is a good change. Southron archers moving into position over here as well. I suppose the time has come for a bit of ×2 speed, given that we are in a little bit of a lull in proceedings. They're over here, Swan Knights climbing down off the walls now. I mean, the Serpent Archers with those two-handed weapons of theirs are also going to be very, very key if Harad want to go on to have any chance at winning this battle for themselves. Still the Black Serpents, I mean, that is maybe something they can use the extra space in this little area for. Black Serpent Bodyguard, very healthy unit of them as well. Lancers down. Another morale shattering tool also. There is this unit of Champions of Nafrat 2. Shari. Some more depleted offerings. More champions. So they will be leading from the front. So there is Harad quality. Taking inventory of what they have. Enough certainly to worry the attackers as the Southron archers continue to shoot. Not the most damaging archer by any means, but the longer that the attackers just sort of hang around in the distance, those extra kills will be appreciated. So Stelgard are over there. I mean, I assume that what they're waiting for here is siege equipment to arrive. The Rhovanion units that were pulling up that ram have perished since. I think there's another Rhovanion ram heading around this way. Indeed there is. What very little remains of these tribal berserkers going to knock down this gate. Although there's not really any infantry behind them to really make a play at this. There's 50 archers. Tough though the Rhovanion archers may be, that isn't exactly what they would have been hoping for, I'm sure. Trebuchet. The fact that that trebuchet is being pulled forward suggests that it has ammunition, and knocking a couple of holes in the wall will definitely be something the attackers will want to do here. Southron archers still trying to take pot shots. Another ram has arrived, a Dol Amrothian one. So I think the attackers are poised. We are near enough in the final 10k frames as well, so once again that somewhat clumsy metric that I use is proving itself to be true once more. Serpent archers getting into position in the corner of the wall. What are they going after? Nothing anymore with a blank shot. As you would expect, there's nothing really going on over yonder. Veterans of Osgiliath are firing? Are they trying to trade back and forth with the Southron archers that are on this wall? Firing over the houses and towers and workshops of the first layer. All these regular Dol Amroth units shaken or wavering. Maybe not the best of signs for them moving forwards. Four of the Arathirim left, but they've already been certainly a presence for Dol Amroth in this battle so far. In terms of kills, the cavalry for the attackers has not been absolutely devastating, but as I've mentioned, as a disrupting tool, they have been making use of them. And as long as your units are contributing to the fight in some way, it doesn't necessarily have to be kills. It can still be very useful. Those units are rousing, are they not? Yes. But the other gate falls, so what now? How do the attackers want to handle this? We mentioned the trebuchet slowly making its way along. The repositioning of all of these units. One of the siege towers is now also being attached onto the wall. Fountain Guard on the way across, so Gondorians moving over maybe to attack the river-facing gate. Dol Amroth maybe are going to take the lead at the one that leads into the centre of town. Numenor maybe, and what very little remains of the Rhovanion, to act in support of these two. So far, we still wait. That's what the veterans of Osgiliath were inevitably going after, so the Serpent Archers makes a little bit more sense. I mean, after all, they are also the kind of unit which can be useful to Harad in melee, certainly more so than the Southron Archers anyway, though I suspect literally everyone in the Harad ranks is going to have to raise a weapon in melee here to try and reverse the situation they currently find themselves in. Gondor Archers on the way out. Amrothian Honour Guard slowly creeping forwards too. Rhovican Archers still have a bit of ammunition actually, so every little helps. A little bit of extra damage. Got Southron Pikemen in there, but the classic is that you put your shielded unit in front and shield values will be coming into effect. We did mention at the start of the battle that this is where maybe the dismounted Serpent Guard do fall down a little bit in comparison to other similarly priced units like the Uruk-hai infantry from Isengard, for example. Their shield value is not as high, and you do need to upgrade their armour like this in order to really bring them up to a more sustainable level there too, so it makes them a little bit more expensive to do that job. So it's only a little microcosm example there, but still. There's actually some kind of counter-attack here, which I think is... It was doomed from the start, these scraps of units being sent to die against the waiting Dol Amroth ranks. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Tower also going to be utilised. Dol Amroth's spearmen will be here to disrupt the Southron Archers, and Dol Amroth's spearmen may be average in melee, but they'll get the job done there. There's some champions of Nafarat and Serpent Archers mobbing the Rhovican units that were utilising this siege tower, but Froggy merely manoeuvring into position. The next wave will be a Gondorian one, and it will be far more substantial than a handful of Rhovican hoplons. This one's going to be some Gondor spearmen, some Gondor archers in there as well. Numbers are going to be the key here. We have this rather bizarre visual glitch again, which is to do with the archers on the backs of the Gondor archers. Sort of distorts. It's the sort of thing which also is a contributing factor to that very, very peculiar death animation that we see on occasion. Not too much in the way of damage being done here, but more of the Gondorians are starting to arrive now, ready to push onwards. Still, the siege towers are going to be the only ones moving in first, and I suppose there's a certain wisdom to this from the attackers. As they move forwards like this, more resources are going to have to be siphoned off if Harad wants to stop these advances, and that will of course take some of their upfront strength around the gatehouses away, and then when they inevitably do drop the hammer, they will be less prepared. And here we are, with Dol Amroth men-at-arms and a unit of spears which was also following them up, getting up close and personal with the Southron archers. I think they still have a few shots left in them as well, so exactly the sort of thing which the attackers will be wanting to deny the defenders use of. They got their own archers as well still, so if they can claim some territory up on the walls, that would be very useful for their purposes as well. Ooh, Harad, they're trying to move around, but in so doing, the attackers will be moving through this gatehouse very, very quickly. A hole in the wall as well from the trebuchet. This is where things are going to get difficult, you would suggest, especially considering there is cavalry in behind their lines. The Swan Knights, they are shaken. I don't know how long they're going to last, but the panic they've engendered in the defenders here is going to be enough to give this infantry a bit of an opportunity to get itself established. Fountain Guard, Nimlothian Honour Guard, Tribal Berserkers, none of these units are going to be a welcome sight for the Southron line, which has established itself already. I mean, the more space you give to the force that has the superior man count, the more difficult it's going to be for you. We do have the Veterans of Osgiliath, of course, indistinguishable from the Wardens of the White Tower when fully upgraded like this, which might be a little bit of a problem. Though I do appreciate the gold level armour upgrade for a unit that's certainly of a higher tier like the Veterans should be something very, very good. In terms of standard non-bodyguard archers, this might make them the best skirmishing one in the game, maybe more so than the Naruna Aru now. Gold level upgrades like that. Interesting to see how that affects the thought process of building an army with the few factions that have access to that functionality. Pretty central to what Gondor want to do, I would say, especially with the cheaper cost involved. The Numenorians moving forward. Numenorians, again, next god of our Menelaus moving in. The Serpent Archers do have a certain armour score as well, so this is one of the more useful targets for these Axemen to be going after. Naruna Aru Royal Guard as well. They still have ammunition now. I think just being used as a very, very solid spear unit in melee is probably what's going to be called for here. Still cavalry making a nuisance of itself. Hashari are over here. There's still arrow fire being used. Demons of the Desert, the sort of thing which could be something to turn the tide on at least one of the engagements, and then Harad can maybe try and consolidate from there, but even that's being made difficult. There's not many Swan Knights left, but they're still just getting in the way. I can't imagine the kill count on them is extremely high, but they've just been making life far more awkward for Harad in terms of positioning their units where they want to be throughout the entire battle. And that's the sort of thing which is difficult to measure in terms of whether you would say the cavalry has paid for itself or not, but the fact that they're a single HP cavalry unit and they're still doing something in the late game is a sign that survivability has been addressed somewhat. The Royal Legion of Menelaus as well, getting involved, one of the very best units in class as well. This is where the Harad cavalry is going to be doing its thing as well. I think this is going to be too much for Harad to deal with though, even with the cavalry doing what it can. This defence over here, well, there goes the Numenor general. Demons of the Desert do have that anti-cavalry and melee after all, but as I was mentioning, there goes the Gondorian general as well. So a few generals being lost here by the attackers. As I mentioned, morale is something of a concern, more of a concern in this patch. It will be the sort of thing you've got to look out for a bit more, so we'll see. This defence over here though, like I was saying from Harad, is a little bit more organised and has managed to hold itself in place a little bit better than the defences elsewhere in the final stand. But Dol Amroth still pressurising this area as well, though this is a lot of champions of Nafarat that are over here, so I don't know how long this Dol Amroth attack is going to last, but as long as they can keep all of these defenders busy, I'm sure they will be happy. Dol Amroth archers being sent forward, I don't know if they still have ammunition. I think again it's just a case of trying to attack with everything they have in melee, try and tie up as much of Harad as possible so that they can continue to make progress elsewhere without a spare unit of trollmen being repositioned. Now, of course, this does mean these archers will get butchered en masse. Still a few, technically speaking, Harad is still standing over here, and going to win over in this engagement over here. Dismounted Serpent Guard chasing down the Veterans of Osgiliath. The Veterans probably can go toe to toe with the Serpent Guard without too many issues, but they want to be trying to utilise as many of their missiles as they possibly can, first and foremost. And they will be able to do a little bit more so. The bane of Harad in many ways are archers. One of their most obvious weaknesses. Haradrim swordmasters are in here. Only 24 of them remain, however. Maybe biting off a little bit more than they can chew. As they go in and get themselves surrounded by Muhards and by Hashari. They are still cleaving their way through, still acquiring a good kill count for themselves. Still yet more arriving as well. The Rhovanion catapult. Some serpent archers are actually outside of the walls, so they've climbed down from the siege tower, I would assume. Once again, this very weird, almost spidery insectoid glitch on these bows is very, very peculiar. But the serpents, going to be dealing with them. Now that is a lot of units on the approach. I think it may actually just be one unit of halberdiers, which is extremely stretched out. What have we got over here then? Well, each of our Menlos, the attackers are actually wavering a little bit in their ability to continue moving. Could it be that the high-end Harad damage dealers are enough to dig them out of the deficit they found themselves in? I've seen stranger things happen, and Numenor, the relatively small nature of their armies, may prove to be a real concern here, and perhaps with some tactical charges. That is the last attacking general, so with the death of Imrahil on foot, from that charge, as I was just mentioning, some tactical charges could be very useful. All of the attacking generals are now gone. What could this be? Having a look at this actually, I think it may very well be. I think if they use those black serpents well, I don't really see how the attackers can actually go on from here to be successful. And thinking back to that transitional phase, I think the defenders did a reasonable job at mitigating how much damage the attackers are really capable of doing in that kind of situation. Hard. Beast Hunters are still the Haradrim Swordmasters, not taking losses at a particularly high rate now that they've managed to get themselves set, and against stuff like Beast Hunters in melee, that would be lots of kills for them. The cavalry's still roaming around. Those halberdiers as well. The Rhovanion catapult could end up being exceedingly necessary here for the attackers if they are to go on to win this. Into the desert. Ooh, they charged in there, the Black Serpent bodyguard, but they picked probably the wrong time to do so now that the halberdiers have arrived. They're going to get out of there before too much damage is done, but unfortunate timing there more than anything else. You can see what they were going for. I think they wanted to charge into the catapult crew if possible, or any sort of rear charge over here as the champions of Nafarat set about the Narun Aru Royal Guard. Still Demons of the Desert, though I think being used as a melee unit now. Haven't seen any full-blooded hits from them, but I would assume that there's been some, because Numenor, where once they were looking fairly healthy, that is not really the case any longer. Affections of Osgiliath, fully upgraded as they are, I did mention I would back them in a fight like this, even if they had not managed to get those few volleys off into the Serpent Guard first, but something of a victory here for the attackers, though I don't think one unit of veterans is necessarily going to be enough to turn the tide elsewhere. The amount of champions has been a real problem as well, and I did mention at the start of the battle, champions of Nafarat Trollmen are going to be useful against all of the attacking factions today, so it makes sense that Harad invested so heavily into them. The kind of unit that they are is very, very useful. Champions especially, given the positioning of them, but yeah, the defenders, Harad, going to defend their capital by the looks of things successfully. Send the armies of the west packing. There's a lot of units still. To be fair, most of the numbers are being supplied still by some Southrons and some Muhards. If you took all them away and it was only the Trollmen left, Harad wouldn't have that much remaining, but the quality, I think, would still be enough. The cavalry, quite telling that the Black Serpents are the only cavalry unit left standing. I did mention that the disruptive effect the attacking cavalry had throughout the battlefield was useful. but in the end they have been dealt with. Further back, the catapult crew being engaged in melee, pushed away from their artillery pieces as well. No chance Rhovanion are going to be able to remount their catapult from here. Again, the cavalry comes in. They're fighting back over here. Still 3 Haradrim Swordmasters remain, though Demons of the Desert are over here in melee now as well. The Champion of Nafrat in there too, so that will finally be enough to bring down Numenor's finest. Don't really know what left. Well, there is some Dol Amroth forces. Bit of a wet noodle fight between the 2 units of archers. 1-to-1, you would probably back the Dol Amroth archers in a fight like this because it will mostly come down to defensive scores, which the Dol Amrothians have at their disposal, but a charge from the Trollmen means that it's all a moot point, and it was never going to be a 1v1 for them. That was a rather dramatic death rattle. And I think that's it. I mean, certainly it for the Rhovanion. I mean, search and destroy now for the Black Serpent Bodyguard. That will be their job. If anything, they can. Ooh. And I suppose it's all well and good now, trying to bring down what very little remains. Dol Amroth Halberdiers. But reward for doing their job so well, the Black Serpents, is to be sent against a unit of halberds charged into. And I think Champions of Nafrat victorious in the end, I think, against the Veterans of Osgiliath, though there is a unit of demons over here, so it could have been the champions in melee, could have been a volley or 2 from the Demons of the Desert as well, which I think have proven to be a very important unit indeed. Those specialty projectiles, very good at turning the momentum in a fight. More difficult, as we knew from the last patch, to use than stuff like the Witches or the Iron Watch, but it's still on that kind of level. If they can be used correctly for Harad, it just takes a little bit more finesse, and on this occasion I have to say they were used very well, built on the backs of the huge armour-piercing damage and savagery of the upper-end Trollmen, and then support around from the more numerous Southrons, armour-piercing laced throughout, and the dismounted Serpent Guard as well, which have done a good job. So this has been a good advertisement, I would say, for Harad's strengths going into the next version of the game. Don't know what else there is. Well, cheeky, a last-ditch attempt. A single unit of Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms and Tundra's Fox does have the, well, it had things occupied, though 10 Southron pikemen contesting the town centre means that isn't going to last for very long. Having a look at this, yeah, I'd say 6% does seem about right. It'll probably be 7 by the end of the battle. Yeah, that late game. Good strength shown by Harad. Perhaps the Rhovanion, the costly assault from the Rhovanion earlier on was more key than we thought. And Gondor didn't have, well, Gondor was bloodied and bruised certainly after the initial assault as well. The smaller nature of the Numenor army also making life a little bit more difficult. Dol Amroth, 3 cavalry units was maybe a bit excessive, even if they were used reasonably well. And as far as infantry goes, not quite as well renowned for it as the Gondorians or Numenorians they were fighting alongside, so the fact that it was basically on them to try and dig their team out was maybe being a little bit ambitious, but there we go. Harad victorious, defending their city in this, and they deserve credit for that, because again, in any battle where you're outnumbered by 1 or 2 armies, it's going to be difficult for you. You can see some of the differences to the meta as it's going to be going forward in this version of the game now. I think more on that when the patch is actually released and we start talking about the factions again, because we're going to be doing all the faction overviews once more. We'll start off with the new factions that are added to the game, the Rhovanion, Haradrim and Dol Guldur, but we will also be going back through all of the other factions as well, following on from that. But enough of that for the time being. Today, the day belongs to Harad and all of the defending players, so very well done to all of them. The attackers didn't approach it in completely the wrong way. I think for the most part they were all attacking at the same time. They were pressurising multiple positions, trying to make the battlefield as big as possible mostly, even, well, on the first layer and on the second layer. So again, it's just one of those things. I think that you would say that Harad won the battle rather than the attackers lost it. So let's see what did the damage for the Gondorians. We were viewing it from the perspective of 2 times after all. The Fountain Guard did very well up on those walls, so I've heard people be a little bit concerned about the Fountain Guard losing their status really as a standard phalanx unit. However, they still maintain all of the damage, and in many ways they're actually capable of dishing out that damage more quickly now. It will also give Gondorian players more of an incentive to use the Guards of Osgiliath, which is a more genuine pike unit anyway. So again, horses for courses, isn't it? You use things differently, and the Fountain Guard clearing a wall like that, being on the front foot in an almost Numenorian infantry-esque fashion, that's exactly the sort of thing which they're going to be very useful for. Citadel Guard may be a little bit less impressive, but we didn't really get to see them in action too much. As far as the rest of the army goes, over 200 kills on Gondor infantry, so it goes to show again, entry-level Harad units going to struggle against the Gondor infantry, especially when they're fully upgraded as they were. And Lothian Honor Guard with 152, which is not too bad considering Serpent Archers and the like were their target, and Quarry and Melee. And those veterans of Osgiliath doing quite well. The Axemen of Lasarnak were struggling in most occasions. We saw them. Those kill counts are not amazing, but they're not terrible either. But yeah, so there we have it. Big thank you to 2 times for sending this one in. I know that battles are continuously being run on the test version of the game, so this is one of those where whenever I get given one, I will assume it's because they want me to show it, rather than I won't just go in and start taking replays, because again, we want to be showing the new patch in as good a light as possible, given that it's taken us this long to get here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to showing off more, because I know that there's more battles and maps that people have edited. I know there's a Dwarven Fortress of some description. I know there's a redone version of Khan Doom, which I did mention before the turn of the year, that was something that was being worked on. Also, I think there is, maybe the Dwarven Fortress is the redone Moria, I'm not sure, because that's something which is also very much in the works. But yeah, there's a lot of things. Like, this is a map that we have seen on occasion before. I think there's going to be a couple of tweaks made to it as well, but for the most part, this is what you can expect from the Harad capital. But yeah, hopefully we're getting closer by the day. I think you know, the new patch has been something which has been sort of like that monster on the horizon for a long time at this point, but it does look as though it is finally going to see the light of day in the near future, and hopefully that is indeed the case. So yeah, big thank you to 2 times, big thank you to all of the players, and I think this is a WK map, so if that is indeed the case, then big thank you to him as well for making this and making some tweaks to it too. As for what's coming up next, I don't know. This is going to be, as I'm recording this, I'm going to try and get this one out in the next week or so. I've recorded about a month and a half in advance at this point, but I want to be obviously pushing this to the front of the queue as best I can. So that will certainly be happening at the nearest available opportunity. So I don't know which battle is going to follow this based on what I've already recorded. I do, however, have a couple of battles I have not recorded yet from one of the players in this very replay. Actually, Tommy the Wise, he's given me a couple of scenarios on the old version of the game, which I will be recording, though of course you won't be seeing them until about a month and a half after you see this one. It is just the way of things, but yes, that is going to be the plan for now. I do think that there's going to need to be another information broadcast at some point regarding the channel, because you know, things can still go many different ways, though like I say, regardless of what happens, it's very unlikely to actually affect the channel too much, so we'll see. It's one of those things, isn't it? But yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.